Okay. You want to get a little bit more specific? You're on the right track.
What the forage values for that year will allow us to feed.
Yeah. Yep. So carrying capacity is going to tell us exactly what it says. It's going to tell us what the maximum number of animal units are that could be supported by that pasture. Okay. It does not necessarily take into consideration utilization rate. And so, which is the second step of the stocking rate calculation. So what is the definition of a stocking rate then?
How many cows you can healthily put on that property without overgrazing.
Yep, for a specific period of time. So stocking rate always has time associated with it. And so time can look like a month, like an AUM. It can look like a year, or it can look like a season. And so we typically see seasonal stocking rates here in the West Coast, because especially on the cattle side of things, we see cattle graze for like a winter spring season down here in the foothills. And then we see them graze for like a high elevation summer fall season in the mountains. And so seasons are kind of a gray area. So we're going to work hard to define what those seasons are in number of days or months. Okay, so next question. Do we set stocking rate at carrying capacity? Why or why not? All right, so for the folks coming in, the question was, do we set stocking rate the same as carrying capacity? Why or why not?
Wouldn't it be no, because there's two different like time periods for the stocking rate and the carrying capacity?
Yes, so the answer is no, for sure. So we never set stocking rate the same as carrying capacity. It's always going to be lower. And the reason for that is because not only is there a time difference between those two values, but with stocking rate, we have to take into account a bunch of other considerations like utilization rate. And so what we're going to do today is I'm going to get you guys started on the process for calculating stocking rates, even though you have some experience doing it from the case studies last week. And then when it comes to utilization rate stuff, I'm going to send you guys out to go do some research and bring that research back into the calculations. And so that's probably not going to happen today, but we're going to at least get you guys started on calculating carrying capacity. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we're going to look at a set of slides. All right. So Julie is in the process of developing a monitoring program for the MacArthur Swamp. And as part of that monitoring program, she's actually putting out kind of 1 by 1 meter plots at a couple of different places in each pasture. And we call those plots exclosures. And the idea is that no livestock or wildlife species outside of insects will be able to graze inside the exclosure. And so what would be the benefit of having some forage values or knowing how much forage actually grows in an exclosure compared to an area that has a chance to be grazed? Why would we want to know that? Okay, so the question again is, why would we want to collect data in an exclosure?
It'll give us good dash health or any other nuances that we might not be able to see when it's grazed.
Okay, and it's going to give us a maximum forage value, right? So if grazing is excluded on it, then we know what the pasture potential is. And so that becomes really important because when we calculate carrying capacity, it's going to be kind of our top end. So we know that the pasture can produce this, but we're going to manage it so that we're only utilizing this much of the vegetation. So really quickly, again, why is it important that we leave some vegetation in the stand and not allow it all to be grazed?
For regrowth the following year.
Okay, regrowth the following year. Thanks, Courtney. Why is that important? How does that help?
It helps like with the soil management and making sure like things don't like necessarily like run off or like lose all the nutrients.
Okay, so it's going to create a thatch layer that's going to hold topsoil in place. Great.
Would it also like be for competition, like other grasses, they need competition to either grow, like continuously grow better or just not become extinct?
Yeah, exactly. Competition is a good one. How about one more? So think about the relationship. I think we went over this probably 2 weeks ago. I think it was 2 weeks ago. Oh, did you say roots?
I know she said that her connection's a little spotty, but I think that's where she was going with that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So if you guys want to expand on that, that's totally fine. But think about the relationship between the vegetation above the soil and the material below the soil.
Nutrients?
Nutrients is a big one. Okay. If we
Don't the
leave,
roots kind of match what's above the soil?
yeah, exactly. Thanks, Alex. It does. So if we leave some matter above the soil before the plant dies, it's going to die with the root system intact. Okay, and that's for our annual grasses. Our perennial grasses, they're going to be alive. They're just going to go through periods of green up and dormancy. So their root system becomes really, really important because it's going to store a lot of carbohydrates to get through that dormant season. And then it's stockpiled energy so that it can start to regrow again during the next growing season. But our annual grasses, which is what we're dealing with here in the swamp, is it's important to leave some residual dry matter for all the reasons that you guys just stated. So keeping topsoil intact because we have a root system in place. The matter above the soil helps insulate the soil so that we aren't losing a ton of soil microbes and biota. And then we aren't exposing the topsoil and allowing runoff and erosion events. So those are just a few reasons why it's important to leave residual dry matter in the field. So we're going to figure out carrying capacity in the context of like, if we took everything, this piece of property could run how many animal units for 6 months. Okay. But the reality is then we're going to take it a step further and you guys are going to go research what the proper utilization rate would be in an area like this. Okay, so to get started, I kind of went through this exercise this morning, just to make sure that I was on the right track and had the right values. So let's review really quickly. And this is the part where you guys are going to tell me what is the first step to calculating a stocking rate or a carrying capacity. So step number one.
Knowing your area.
Okay, knowing the area is definitely part of this. If you guys refer back to the note guides and stuff last week, there's a 4-step method to calculating stocking rate. We're looking for step number 1.
Is step 1 usable forage?
Yeah, determining usable forage. Okay, what's step 2?
Adjust for accessibility.
Yep. So adjust for utilization. Excuse me. And we call that utilization rate. So you're going to see it abbreviated as UR. Okay, and then step 3.
The forage demand.
Yep, forage demand. Okay, so this is going to be what the animal is going to eat, right? And then step 4.
Determine the stocking rate.
Yep. Sorry, I forgot to turn my email off. That will just keep dinging. Okay. All right, so determine usable forage is going to be step 1. And that's what we are going to spend our time talking about this morning, afternoon. My gosh, I don't even know what it is today. And then we're going to have a short conversation about utilization rate. And this is the part where you guys are actually going to go find some research to determine a utilization rate that is appropriate for a drought year and a normal year. And then we'll go through, or you guys can use the notes and stuff from last week to calculate forage demand. So by this point in time, you should have a fairly good idea of what percentage of body weight a cattle will eat. So a cow or a steer, and then how much that translates to for a month in pounds, and then for a season or a year in pounds. All right, and then with that, you guys are going to determine the carrying capacity. And so we're going to focus on carrying capacity using a utilization rate of 100%. Okay, so meaning that we're going to take 100% of the matter that's out there. And then you're going to do 2 additional calculations where you use different utilization rates that are based on what you find in literature. All right, so I'll give you some more guidance on that here in just a second. But this is the 4-step method for calculating stocking rate and carrying capacity. All right, so the data that you guys are going to use is what Julie actually collected. So this is actual data. And so on the south pastures, the S2 pasture and the S4 pasture is where she has exclosure units right now. And so she went out, and in the exclosure, she dropped a hoop pretty randomly within that exclosure. And then everything within the hoop that was edible by an animal was collected. Okay, so she took the tillers of the grass clear down to just above the soil. And so she collected everything that was in this 0.96 foot squared ring and she put it in a bag. Then she tared the bag and she weighed how much the sample was. So she did that 3 times in each pasture. So in the S2 pasture, her data points weighed in at 30 grams, 36 grams, and 33 grams respectively. All right. And then she did the same thing in S4. And so there she actually ended up with results of 16 grams, 13 grams, and 48 grams. So really quickly, let's make sure we know what we're talking about or the areas that we're talking about. So I'm just going to pull up the image with the pastures on it. Okay, so this is one of the images off of that slide set that is in the grazing management plan folder. And it's based off of what Julie shared with us when she was a guest speaker. And so what she's really, just as a point of information, like in a review, these are the areas that have major Medusa head infestation, right? So these south pastures. And so the pastures that she has exclosures in right now are S2 and S4. And so she took 3 samples out of S2, 3 samples out of S4, and that's what those values actually equate to. All right, so now that we are kind of reoriented to what we're talking about and where we're talking about, let's go ahead and switch gears and go back to the slide set. Okay, so now that we know the steps to calculating stocking rate and carrying capacity, and we have the data in place, what do you think our next step is going to be?
The utilization rate.
Okay, great guess. That's actually going to come in step 2. So think back to what step 1 is. And how would we get that number? So here, let's go back here. So if we know step 1 is determining usable forage production.
Pounds per acre.
What? Sorry.
Pounds per acre. You gotta
Okay, yeah, we got to get to pounds per acre. Great. So that is going to be kind of the goal for step 1 here. And unfortunately, it's not as simple as just one calculation. So we've got to step through a few of them. And so I wanted to get you guys started. So this is some calculations that I did earlier this morning, and I hope they're right. You guys are going to check them for me as we go through them. Okay, but step number 1 is really to determine an average for S2 and S3. Right, so we're just going to build this in here. So can you guys please calculate a quick average for S2 and S3? Making me mad.
The average of S2 would be 33.
Okay, 33 grams, great.
And then the average for S4 is 25.67.
25.67. Great. Okay, thank you. All right, step number 1, check. All right, so now that we've got our averages, let me just walk you through the S2 pasture example. Okay, so the forage ring, that yellow or orange ring that I showed you in the previous slide, that it would be nice if it actually measured 1 square foot exactly, but it doesn't. It measures 0.96 square feet. And so you may be asking, well, Casey, can't we just round up to 0.1? It's only 0.4 off or 0.04 off. And I would normally be like, yeah, no problem if that was your final answer. Not a problem. But we can't do that here because it extrapolates because we are dealing with a lot of acreage. And so we could be leaving a lot of forage out there or taking a lot of forage if our measures are off very much. All right, so we know what we have in terms of grams on average for the pastures that's coming out of the forage ring. So the first step that I usually go through, you guys can do this differently if you want, is to figure out how many pounds that is. So will somebody just do a quick conversion of grams to pounds, whether that's a Google search or one of those tools or whatnot, and just let me know if this number is correct.
That's what I got.
Okay. So we'll get it. How about 2 more people to check? I can't tell if anybody's in the chat. Okay. So Courtney says yes. Let's get 2 more people to say yes to that as well.
I also got that.
Great.
That's right.
Okay, fantastic.
That as
Thank you.
well.
It's all about checks and balances, guys. Okay, so we know what that number tells us is that there is a 0.0727 pounds of forage that was collected in that ring. Okay, so it may not seem like very much, and you're correct, it's not. But that's okay because it's less than 1 square foot in a 700 and some odd acre pasture. All right, so now that we've got that kind of figured out as step 1, our next step is to take that pounds value and try to figure out how many pounds are actually produced per acre. Okay, so the question we have to ask ourselves is how many of those 0.96 square foot rings are in an acre. And so I did this, and I want you guys to check it by just doing a square feet to acre conversion. I think it was on Google. And I plugged in 0.96, I think. And no, how did I do that? Now I have to look back at what I actually did. Okay, so I asked the Google how many acres or how many square feet are in an acre. And it said it was 43,560. And then I did a conversion of was it one? Yeah, 43,560 divided by 0.96, because that's what the ring actually measures. And so that gave us a bigger value, which is what we were looking for, of 45,375 square feet. Or not square feet, but rings. Rings can fit in an acre. So does that make sense? And is that correct? Is that the same math you guys got?
That's what I just calculated.
Okay.
The same number.
Yes.
Okay, great. So now that we know that you can fit 45,375 rings per acre, we can then extrapolate that out and multiply that times the average pounds of forage per ring, which was this 0.727. And so what that ends up being is about 3,298.76 pounds per acre. And so that was my math. If you guys could just check that, that would be great.
Looks good to me.
That's what I got.
Okay. All right, so our next step, we aren't done yet with forage availability, right? So we figured out how much forage is left per acre. And so to put this in an applicable mindset, these measures that Julie took in grams, they were actually at the end of the season. So she took them in October after grazing had already taken place in the pastures. And so there's still 3,298.76 pounds of dry matter per acre left in these pastures. All right, so our next step is to then look at pasture acreage, okay? Because we're gonna take that 3,200 pounds and then multiply it by the number of acres that are in the pasture. And so I had to search high and low for this because I didn't have it. So this is out of the original ranch or management plan. And so we are looking at, there we go, pasture S2. And so let me try to annotate this. Oh, great. I just like clear this guy here. Now you can actually read it. Okay, so the number of acres in all the pastures here are about in pasture S2 is 747 acres. And so we're gonna come back to this chart a couple of times. Okay. So now that we've got 747 kind of in our brain, the next step that we're gonna do, go away. To figure out forage availability is take that 3298.76, so about 3,298 pounds produced per acre, multiply that out times 747 acres in pasture S2 to get the total amount of forage that is left over. And so if you guys could just check and make sure that that number is correct, that would be great.
Yeah, it's correct, Dr. Jelly.
Okay, great. Okay, so that means that there's about 2.4 million pounds of dry matter still left in pasture S2. So those are the values that we're going to start with. So even though it's end of season, at the midpoint of the season, we would expect that number to be much higher. Julie needs a bare minimum carrying capacity. And this is a good year to do it because we're in the middle of a drought. When she took these values, we hadn't had a ton of rain, so there wasn't a bunch of green grass coming up underneath it. And so it is really giving her a true estimate of what is left out there. And so this is kind of like the worst of the worst of the worst for carrying capacity. The bare minimums is what we're going to give her. So after we figure out the forage availability, the next step that I'm going to task you guys with is to figure out utilization rate. And so utilization rate, again, is the amount of forage that should be utilized that is safe for the ecosystem. So we don't want to take too much. We don't want to take too little. If we take too much, it exposes topsoil. Soil health gets degraded very quickly. If we don't take enough utilization, then our grasses head out. We can get into invasive species problems. Invasive species are going to pop up whether you use too much or not enough forage. But in this country, in this scenario, what would be one major concern of not using enough of the forage? So again, the question was, in this ecosystem, what would be a major concern with not using enough of the forage?
Overgrowth?
Overgrowth. Okay, you're on the right track. Kelvin, take that a little bit further. Why is overgrowth bad?
Overgrowth of unwanted vegetable or vegetation?
Okay.
Or the quality of protein maybe in the
Yeah.
forage?
Yep. Getting there. So protein quality is going to go down if we don't use enough of it, for sure. What else?
Fire danger, maybe?
Yeah. Fire is what I was hunting for. So if we don't use enough of the forage, it creates a whole layer of fine fuels. And that is a huge fire risk in this country. So the good news is that it would just stay contained to the swamp because there's irrigated pasture all around it and a lake and stuff, but it would burn up the whole entire swamp. And so to where you couldn't go back for several years without getting some grasses reestablished. So, okay, anyway, all this stuff works together. So I'm going to let you guys kind of do some research on utilization rate. And there's some really good information out there in peer-reviewed literature. And the ecosystem, just as a reminder that we're dealing with, is kind of Intermountain West. So there's going to be different researched utilization rates depending on the ecosystem that you're in. So like the grasslands in the Midwest is going to have a very different utilization rate than the high desert in the Southwest, like in New Mexico. And so there's lots of reasons that those utilization rates shift depending on ecosystem. And a lot of those we've already talked about. So we need to figure out what the proper utilization rate is for this scenario. Okay, so some things that you can think about and you can write up and you can investigate as part of your grazing management plan to give Julie some more background is, what does the literature say about utilization rate in this area? What are the percentages that you would recommend? And they don't have to be hard and fast percentages. They can be something to the effect of like, in a normal precipitation year, utilization rate should be this. In a poor precipitation or a drought year, utilization rate should be this. And then also take into account, as you're reviewing literature, what about the dominant vegetation? So just thinking back to those pastures as 1, 2, 3, and 4, what is going to be the dominant vegetation or species in those pastures? Not a trick question.
The native grasses.
Say it louder, Courtney.
Did you say, is it native grasses? Like the
So that should be there, but unfortunately something else is there. So what's there?
Medusa head.
Exactly. Yep. So Medusa head is dominant in these pastures. And so we know livestock can't utilize Medusa head very well for a lot of reasons we talked about last week. And so when you are thinking through your grazing or your Medusa head management strategy, does utilization rate work into being a tool for if you are using grazing as a solution or part of your solutions? So those are things to think about for scenarios to run with utilization rate. All right, so with utilization rate, you guys are going to pick whatever you're going to pick, but you need to defend it with literature or practical sound experience. Okay, so people that have, done testimonials, whether you make phone calls to people or you look at blogs and look at write-ups on extension web pages or something like that. Some practical sound experience is acceptable here. So after you figure out a couple of utilization rates to run per pasture, you can then take the total forage produced, so from number 1, right? And then you can multiply that times the utilization rates or utilization or multiple utilization rates. And that will give you total available forage. Let's do total grazable forage, so we aren't getting confused. All right, and so that becomes the goal for step number 2. And then step number 3 is where you can estimate animal demand. Okay, so once you get available forage, we know part of this work is already done for us because we know cattle are going to be the only thing that is going to graze that area that isn't wildlife. And there's not a lot of wildlife to even be worrying about calculating their portion of it for. So there's like, I think 20 to 30 whitetails but that's it. And so that's not worth trying to figure out right now as well. So the animal demand is going to be limited to cattle only. And we're gonna, let's say that the season of use is to May 1st through November 15th. Okay, so you'll need to calculate total days or months, depending on what you decide to use. And so your goal is to figure out how much feed it's going to take to support one animal unit season. And so this is animal unit season. And the season is May 1st through November 15th. Then from there, you can figure out stocking rate or carrying capacity, which is where you take your total grazable forage and you're going to divide that by the animal unit season pounds. And that'll give you carrying capacity. And so carrying capacity can be expressed in number of head. It can support, you can translate it to AUMs. That's totally fine. Or it could even be AUYs. So there's all kinds of factors that you can actually calculate in there. All right, so keep in mind that that whole process needs to be done for pasture S2, and then it needs to be done again for pasture S4. And yes, your utilization rates for both pastures can be the same. The part that is going to differ is total available forage because the acreage is going to differ. So what you may want to do is put in here like a summary slide or a summary section, table, whatever. So S1 pasture will support blank AUMs, and then not S1, S2, sorry. And then S4 will support however many AUMs. And then we can extrapolate that out to the other two south pastures. So it's our goal is to figure out carrying capacity for each pasture and carrying capacity for the total south pastures. Okay. Questions? Concerns?
Dr. Dialli, where can I find, this might be a dumb question, I'm really sorry if it is, but where can I find the acreage for S2 and S4 pastures?
Good. So you may have just came in a little bit late. So there's the slide set that's on Blackboard. I put it up a little bit earlier today. And on this 5th slide is a picture of the field names here in the 2nd column, and then the acreage right next to it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yep. And guys, don't get confused because the rest of these columns have like production in pounds per acre, available forage, that type of thing, I'm very much expecting yours to look way different than these numbers here. But it might be helpful if you want to set your table up like this to present in your grazing management plan. So you can use this table kind of for formatting, but I'm really expecting these numbers to be quite different.
And we're just doing it for S2 and S4 pastures, correct?
Yes, but we're gonna extrapolate out to 1 and you know what? That's too much to worry about. Just do it for S2 and S4. That's all we have data for. They're the biggest pastures anyway. So just
Can you
as an,
go-
sorry, Kelvin, just 2 seconds. Let me say this before I forget. So while we're looking at this table, guys, you'll notice that one of these columns here is harvest efficiency. That's another way for saying utilization rate. So harvest efficiency, the way that they're defining it is that they're going to take 60% of the forage that is available. And so I am fine with 60%. Okay, but you need to tell me why. And I'm hoping that in the why, you actually come up with some different percentages for different scenarios. So keep in mind that this is on a good year. This is not on a drought year. Okay, Kelvin, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Can you go to slide 6?
Yep, I can. This one?
Yeah, and then slide 7.
Yep.
And slide 8.
Yep.
And number 9. Okay.
Great. Okay. How are we feeling about carrying capacity stuff? Thumbs up for we're going to figure it out. It's going to be fine. Okay. Cool. Thumbs up for I have no idea what we just went through and I'm overwhelmed. Okay, cool. All right. So I need a minute to create breakout rooms. So this is a good time to kind of take an 8-minute break or so. So why don't we come back at 3? When we come back, you guys will have invitations to your breakout rooms in your groups. And I'm going to let you guys work on whatever you need to work on. Okay. And then I'm going to bounce around to each of the breakout rooms to the groups, and we're going to do our spot check. So if you guys would, and I will come in at 3:10 to the first room, and I don't know who I'm going to first. So that'll give us enough time for you guys to pull up the document, figure out who's taking me through what, all of that good stuff. And then I will bounce around to the different rooms. Okay, so if everybody is good with that, that's awesome. If not, speak up or forever hold your peace. And I'm going to go ahead and create breakout rooms if you guys want to take a break for a few minutes. And I will be into the first room at 3:10. I'll play you some music.
I'm now the one she left. Haunted tale for someone else. Little bit about herself. Wherever she's sleeping. When strikes out to pierce the dark. Cause a flame from just one spark. Fill the room with smoke so harsh. She exhales a memory. The past is fading over time. It's still hanging on fire. I'm now her used to be. He is now the one she needs. He is now the one she leaves. She looks out at the sunset. On a quilt rack, he holds her tight. And they raise a toast for right. Whiskey kills all things in time. Like things she don't remember. Past is fading over time. But it's still hanging on. I'm now an old headstone. To her grave I'll die alone. A testament of how she's grown. Wherever she is sleeping. It's still hanging on. Well, I'm gonna pick up some of these empties, Lord, as soon as I find where they lay.